$2,500 per hit, the story of how I played a broken piano at 30,000 feet. That $2,500 electronic keyboard, the last gift from my old man, crashed right in the middle of a flight from Los Angeles to New York. That was something. You know, when you're sitting in a cramped airplane cabin, getting ready for takeoff, there's always some noise. Clicking, closing the luggage racks, the flight attendants muttering something. But I sat by the window, like in a world of my own. I'm Autumn Baker, and I always try not to be in the way. I've had a complicated life, and right now I just wanted to practice quietly. I brought my complicated synthesizer with me. It was smaller than a regular one, with adjustable volume, and I'd made sure I had all the permits to carry it. But even so, I tried to sit quietly, tuning it on my lap, barely breathing. Hey! What is this? A piano? This is not your rehearsal room, dear. The voice was high and sharp, a real squeak, with a pronounced Brooklyn accent. I looked up. It was a blonde, middle-aged female flight attendant named Charlotte. Lots of bright makeup, and her bright red manicure seemed to accentuate every movement of her fingers. I stood up in an instant and nodded quickly, my English calm and clear. Excuse me. I'm just doing finger exercises. No sound, and I won't disturb the flight, I promise. Of course. Another one of those who thinks the rules aren't written for them. She simply spat it out. The woman next to her grimaced. These people always think they can just break the rules. Don't they realize that such arrogance creates problems for other passengers? The atmosphere in the cabin changed instantly. The passengers were clearly feeling the tension, but they tried not to look at us. Some even took out their phones, probably to take pictures. Then Charlotte took a step, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She leaned over and hissed, "No more music making. You're not special," and she gave my keyboard a hard shove, which was lying on my lap. Bam! A dry, crackling sound of impact. The thin, light body of the synthesizer flew into the air and crashed into the passage with terrible force. Plastic flew in all directions. Several keys were broken haphazardly. The plane cabin froze in complete silence. I could only hear the hum of the ventilation and the distant cry of a child. I stood still, my eyes wide open. But I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I slowly walked over, knelt down by the pile of debris. I carefully touched a broken key with the tip of my finger. The one key that had somehow survived made a low, squeaky sound, a dull, incomplete tone. But it was there. Charlotte snorted, "Well, of course. You always have to insist on your own. Can you finally shut up?" I didn't answer. I just sat there, transfixed, in front of what was left of my dad's gift. I put my hands on my knees and slowly opened my mouth. It was a low whisper, a barely perceptible breath, but the passengers sitting close heard it clearly. In this country, I whispered, silence is also a weapon. Time seemed to stand still. No one could say anything. Then I slowly raised my hand to touch the broken instrument again. The electronic keyboard lay silent on the cold metal floor. The broken key sections gleamed like bones. I just sat there. No one came over, no one apologized. There was a thick, strange silence in the cabin. All I could hear was the faint vibration of the fuselage and the whiff of the air conditioner, making the hem of my pants sway slightly. I was focused on just one thing: how many keys could still make sound? My trembling fingers pressed gently on one of them. A low, scratchy noise, like static electricity, then a small electronic sound. The note was wrong, but it was a sound. I closed my eyes. A clear picture suddenly appeared in my mind: an old grand piano on the worn carpet of our house in Detroit. Little Autumn, hunched over, playing. My father's smile, looking at me. His gentle voice, "It doesn't matter how you play. The main thing is the feeling." This synthesizer was his last gift. Now you can play anywhere, he said then, laughing. And now it was broken by his foot. No tears flowed. I just felt something break inside. There's still life here, I whispered. I carefully began to collect the keys that worked from the pile of broken cases. You can't compose a full octave, but a few notes that can be played with one hand are possible. And then, in my head, a song began to emerge. A melody built on the right hand alone. The sound would be quiet and choppy, but if you put emotion into it, it would work. Suddenly I noticed that the little boy sitting next to me was watching intently. When our eyes met, he put a finger to his lips and said softly, "Show." A silent reminder not to disturb me. I slowly straightened up. I placed my hand on the keyboard and pressed the first note. A quiet, slightly distorted donk. But that sound rang louder in my heart than anything else in the room. In that moment, something inside me ignited. If it's broken, I'll play on the broken sound. I'm not a victim. I'm a musician. My fingers ran over the keys, creating an imperfect melody. It wasn't pretty, but it held a strange warmth and pain. It wasn't just music. It was my breath. I heard a soft sigh next to me. Looking back, I saw the previously irritated male passenger listening intently, his eyes downcast. Everyone around me tried to say something, but fell silent. Words could not match the sound. I played the last note. The sound was gone in a second. But the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Suddenly, from a few rows away, a quiet voice called out, "What song was that?" I smiled. It's a song without a name. It was created by broken keys and a broken heart. It was the only melody for this moment. The imperfect melody stopped, and a strange silence enveloped the plane. People held their breath, as if trying to swallow something. A moment later there was a ringing sound. Someone placed a plastic cup near the window. This was the signal, and the cabin began to hum softly again. Was this a rehearsal? Or a performance? Yes, it was just noise. Playing to attract attention when the instrument was broken. But someone else said, it was a sound that stuck in the memory. The voices were mixed, English, Spanish, and even a little Polish. They spoke different languages, but their feelings were the same: confusion. No one expressed clear condemnation or support. And in the center of all this chaos sat me, Autumn Baker, in front of what was left of my synthesizer. I folded my hands on my knees, breathing deeply and closing my eyes quietly. It was as if I was breathing the echo of the sound into myself, into my soul. My posture seemed to touch something in people's minds. No one dared to accuse me, but no one could stand up to defend me either. Finally, a middle-aged man from the first row of business class stood up and called out to the flight attendant. "Miss," his voice trembled with indignation, "are you going to explain this somehow?" That was clearly a bust. Charlotte, the flight attendant, simply shrugged and replied coldly, "She broke the rules, sir. Even if she was allowed to carry an instrument, playing it is unwise and improper. Especially on board an airplane." A few people lowered their heads. They didn't object. Indeed, no one gave permission for the performance. But no one could say that kicking him and breaking him was the right thing to do. "Is music really that annoying?" muttered the young man, who had been sitting there, staring at his smartphone. On his screen was a video of me, a broken synthesizer and me fidgeting in front of it. The video lasted only 38 seconds, but something much longer was etched in his mind. Whether it was admiration or guilt, he didn't know. It was unlike any piano he had ever seen. How could it leave such a strong mark with so few notes? Without saying a word, he swiped his finger across the screen and opened his Twitter. After some thought, he typed, "Can't forget that American girl who played the broken piano on the plane." Within minutes, the post received dozens of likes. Little did he know that it would become a viral hit around the world. I opened my eyes quietly. I felt that some of the noise was directed at me. But I didn't look up. If I had looked at their faces, I would probably have broken down. Maybe I was really just in the way? Did this melody make any sense at all? These questions suffocated me. But then the words reached my ears, some song. I almost cried. This was said by an elderly woman in a hat, sitting across the aisle. This was the loudest and most important answer. I didn't smile. I just put my fingers on the remains of the instrument, preparing to play again. When the first note sounded, the boy next to me flinched. A dry sound, like the midnight wind, came from the broken keys. My fingers began to move again. Imperfect sounds. But my gaze was straight. My left hand was not working. The notes were incomplete. But I did not try to hide the flaws. On the contrary, I wove them into the melody, using them as they were. Sometimes the notes fell out, the rhythm broke. But there was a plan. It was like I was putting my soul into each note, as if singing about a wounded thing, some kind of trauma. The noisy passengers gradually quieted down. Some in the back still held their phones, but their hands were still, watching the movements of my fingers on the screens. The flight attendants kept their distance, standing silently. Charlotte stood with her arms crossed, her face stony. But someone noticed that her gaze was trembling slightly. I didn't look up. I just focused on the sounds, even the aftertaste of each note. It was the form of beauty that true musicians have always appreciated. The short melody ended, and there was a pause of a few seconds. This silence filled the salon more than any music. There was no anger or protest in it. Only the quiet sound of life. Suddenly, a passenger by the window whispered, "It's like I've looked into someone's soul." Others nodded, closing their eyes. Some wiped away tears, some looked down, some just breathed silently. Even without words, something was conveyed. Why did an imperfect melody touch so many people so deeply? The answer was simple: it was a sound with a wound. Not a perfect performance. But that's why it touched everyone. When the music ended, no one moved for a while. Silence, as if someone had lost something and at the same time gained something. I slowly lowered my hands. The cold of the broken keys still felt on my palms. And then a quiet, low voice came from the front of the cabin. That wasn't an improvisation. It was calm English. I looked up. From the business class, in front, an elderly man leaned forward. He was wearing a gray suit, and on his lapel was a small International Music Festival badge. His face was covered with deep wrinkles, and his gaze was piercing. He was looking straight at me. "Who is it?" His quiet voice caused a new wave of commotion in the cabin. "Who is she?" The phrase changed the air. The elderly man in the gray suit was Henry Cross, a world-renowned conductor and judge at international music festivals. The passengers sitting nearby gasped. But I didn't turn around. I just kept tapping the keys, as if checking something on a broken instrument. "Hey, girl. Can I ask your name?" Henry asked. I tilted my head slightly. My voice was barely audible. Then, I said, "So, what music school did you study at?" I didn't answer. Instead, another image came to my mind, the dim music room, the cold keys, my mother standing at the piano. This kind of practice won't move anyone, her harsh voice and cold gaze. The piano was associated with pain as much as it was with love. I didn't mention my mother's name. I hated it when my music was judged by its origin. Suddenly there was a sharp snort. Charlotte stood with her arms crossed. "How sentimental. If you're done, put it away. Isn't that right?" She smiled wryly. But no one supported her. "I was listening all the way," said the man in the front row. "You went too far. Break the instrument? With your foot?" That seemed like a show of attitude, because she's from America. The flight attendant frowned and coldly replied, "We have to follow the rules." She brought it. My pushing him may have been careless, but she didn't know yet that this carelessness would shake her life and the entire airline. I silently placed both hands on the fragments of the synthesizer. I slowly stood up. There were no tears on my face. But the tips of my fingers, which touched the cold keys, trembled slightly. I whispered quietly, so that no one would hear, "I'm sorry, Dad." At that moment, I noticed a piece of paper lying next to the piano. It was a copy of the sheet music my father had written for me. Holy smokes, you wouldn't believe the mess I saw on this flight. Even though the sheet music was bent and kinda cruddy, right there in the middle, you could still make out the words clear as day. My dad's handwriting, that stuff was like a shield for my soul. Those words flared up deep inside my chest all over again. I gripped the beat-up ukulele tight and took a deep breath. Time to make some noise one more time. But this time, it wasn't just for me. This sound? No one was gonna take it away. I was gonna make it ring out right from the scar. But before I could really hit the groove, my gaze snagged on something down the aisle. Some dude was shaking, white-knuckling his smartphone. The screen showed a video, a disgusting clip of hate speech and vandalism, already posted to the whole wide world. That was the instant the truth about what happened on this plane got dropped on the outside. My solo performance had started up again, but it wasn't aimed at anyone out there. If anything, every single note was just echoing deep within my own heart. The ukulele's neck was short a few frets, the sound was rough. Still, Chloe didn't stop playing. There's just something that comes across when a broken sound rings out, broken and all. My fingers were tracing a tune that only existed in my memory. It was that short, warm melody my dad and I used to play. The sweat on my palms the first time I played in public. The shaky notes from when I'd secretly practice after my mom, Eleanor Vance, told me I was no good. All those days were pouring into the here and now. As the music kept going, the passengers quietly shifted. The clicking of smartphone cameras died out, and everyone became just listeners. A faint sound in the silence. Each one of those notes was like a question: what kind of sound is left in your heart? How are you gonna deal with this? Nobody could answer. So they had no choice but to take it in silently. Even the flight attendants were frozen, and that loudmouth, arrogant white guy from first class was speechless. The music was just too beautiful to keep up the pretense of not caring. It was too urgent to find an excuse to yell. The kid next to me was following my hand movements with his eyes, and he whispered to his mother, "Why is it so sad and so pretty at the same time?" His mom couldn't answer, just patted his head lightly. The airplane shuddered a little, and that passing air current hit everyone in the same way, right in the gut. No one moved, no one made a peep. A silent audience, not saying a word. And me, Chloe, alone in the middle, felt like the last soldier on a quiet battlefield. My instrument was broken, no one knew my name, I had no respect, and I couldn't even yell. But I still made sound. I still poured my heart into it. The second my song hit a break, the sound just vanished. A moment of silence. Someone couldn't stand the quiet and clapped softly. But the applause stopped right away, because I still had my eyes closed. And then I put my fingers back on the strings. It wasn't over. The next melody started slowly. It was a tune no one had ever heard, but it felt somehow familiar. And then, a different voice echoed from the back. "That's not a beginner's song." That mumble dropped a new question and a sense of hope into the cabin. After my playing was done, silence returned to the cabin. But it wasn't that cold, uncaring kind anymore. Everyone's eyes were a little red. Some were staring out the window, others were looking down at their laps. It was like the echo of the music was still deep inside them. Arthur Sterling quietly let out a breath and rubbed his forehead. "This is the kind of miracle that never happens on a stage," he murmured. Meanwhile, a young guy in the back of the plane was glued to his phone. The video he'd shot was already up on social media, racking up hundreds of likes and reposts in a heartbeat. The comments said things like, "Asian woman suffers discrimination on a plane, her instrument is destroyed." Still, she played. The world held its breath for 53 seconds. A passenger next to the poster asked him, "Is that for real? She just made that up on the spot?" "Yeah," he said, "I saw it. It was the real deal." Followers from all over the world were starting to react to the viral video. Hashtags about anti-Asian slurs on planes and flight attendant vandalism were flying around. The airline's ground staff freaked out. The plane hadn't even landed at Dallas-Fort Worth yet, and the official company account was already flooded with complaints. "This is an FAA violation. Why did you allow it?" But at the same time, completely different voices were popping up. "I want to hear the full song. Who is this player? I can't stop crying." People's focus was shifting from the anger to the sheer beauty. Inside the plane, unaware of the outside world's reaction, the silence continued. But the look in the passengers' eyes was definitely changing. The businessman who'd been scoffing earlier was now looking my way. A mother hugging her young daughter wiped her eyes and whispered to her, "Don't you ever forget this, sweetie. Music has power." And then, another special audience member, whom no one had noticed, stood up inside the cabin. It was an older woman in a classy hat. A gold pin shone on her lapel, engraved with International Music Festival Selection Committee, showing she was the real deal. She slowly walked down the aisle and came right up to me. As if breaking a long silence, she spoke a single word in English, "Excuse me. My name is Miss Thompson." I looked up in surprise and quietly replied, "Chloe." "Just Chloe." The woman smiled, and before turning back, she said, "The whole world is going to know about what happened today. Get ready, Chloe. This is just the start." At that moment, someone in the corner of the cabin mumbled again, "If that music had just been a nuisance, it wouldn't have gone down like this." A flight attendant stopped pushing her beverage cart the second she heard a soft clap up front. It wasn't cheering. It was a hushed, deeply respectful applause. The man standing was Arthur Sterling, a judge for the International Music Festival and a world-class conductor. He took off his hat and slowly walked down the aisle. When a few passengers saw him, they gasped quietly. "No way, Arthur Sterling was on this flight?" Whispers slipped between the seats. I had my hand resting softly on the broken strings, and I noticed his footsteps. Clomp. Clomp. The sound of his expensive leather shoes stopped right in front of me. "Your music astonished me," he said in a low, rich voice. I looked up and slowly stood, but I couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, I wasn't really trying to perform." "I know," he said. "That's why it touched me so deeply." Arthur narrowed his eyes and looked down at the wrecked ukulele. The exposed strings showing through the splintered wood still seemed to be trying to say something. "What is your name?" he asked again. I answered quietly, "Just Chloe. I don't need a last name." My eyes were shaking slightly. Arthur instantly sensed there was a past I didn't want to talk about behind that. "I see," he said. "But I've etched it into my memory, I assure you." With that, he took a business card from his jacket pocket and gently placed it in my hand. It had Music and Harmony Group and his title, Concertmaster and Judge, written on it. "I need you to contact me as soon as this plane gets back on the ground. I want to take your music to stages all over the world." When I heard those words, a heavy feeling welled up inside me. Was this a dream? Why is this happening right after such a humiliating experience? I unconsciously gripped my hand into a fist and looked down. Then my father's words came back to me, "Music isn't about getting back at people. Right. This isn't revenge. I just took my voice and turned it into sound. And if that sound reached someone's heart, that was enough." But something inside me whispered softly, "You can't stop here." I slowly looked up. "Thank you. But for now, I just wanted to protect this music." Arthur smiled. That feeling is exactly what makes a true musician. A woman in the forward cabin was filming the exchange. Just a few minutes later, a headline started trending on social media: "World-class conductor discovers miracle pianist on a plane." Sound and silence, respect and resonance, they were completely transforming the air in the cabin. But no one realized yet that the next name reveal would get to the quiet, true heart of this whole thing. That name, Chloe, it sounds familiar, Arthur Sterling muttered softly as he walked back down the aisle. The only person who reacted to that was a music industry insider in a first-class seat. The lanky man in the gray suit looked up quickly, manipulating his smartphone. "Arthur, could it be her?" He showed his phone screen, which displayed an old newspaper clipping: "Legendary pianist Eleanor Vance keeps daughter off stage." That face. It was undeniably hers, the spitting image of Chloe. The murmuring spread like wildfire on the plane. Chloe was the daughter of Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance, once hailed as a genius pianist, was notorious for her absolute, excessive training of her daughter. That woman was famous for her perfectionism and strictness. No one knew that the person playing on that broken ukulele right now was Eleanor Vance's kid. The shock was a silent punch to the gut, completely rewriting everyone's perception. Meanwhile, I looked down, cradling the business card in my palm like it was a fragile bird. The vibe, the stares, the expectations, the crushing pressure when that Vance name came up, I had lived through all of it. My mother was too great. I was expected to be her perfect copy: flawless performance, relentless practice, and no tears allowed backstage. I wasn't even allowed to love music. That's why I gave up the name, I thought, the realization making my fingertips go cold. Arthur Sterling came back over and told me quietly, "I know some people are starting to figure it out, but take it easy. I won't look at you as anyone's daughter." I looked up in surprise. Arthur's eyes were gentle but sharp. He understood my whole past, yet he was only focused on the music right in front of him. "You have your own sound. The music born from that broken ukulele belongs to no one else. It's not wrong. It's not incomplete." My lips trembled. Those were the words I'd been longing to hear, the sound I'd always wanted someone to truly see. At that exact moment, a news alert flashed across the cabin's large screen, popping up from the plane's Wi-Fi. "Hate incident on international flight goes viral. Destroyed instrument and performance by daughter of Eleanor Vance is global news." The appearance of the name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that 1 minute had just changed everything. You can't hide the music, even if you try to hide yourself. The world was actively starting its hunt for me. But then, something inside me quietly gave way. Maybe I don't have to run anymore. Maybe I can stand by my own music, not just in my mother's shadow. Arthur softly spoke again. "You can stand on your own, not as Eleanor Vance's daughter, but as just Chloe." I finally nodded a tiny bit at that. But I also had a gut feeling that what was coming next wouldn't end with just applause. It was time to face the world. Touchdown and a standing ovation. As the plane started its final descent toward the Newark Liberty International Airport tarmac, I quietly returned to my seat. The wreckage of the broken ukulele had been carefully moved to an empty seat in the back. Still, a piece of the music sheet and a splintered fretboard lay gently by my feet, proof that a performance had taken place right here. None of the passengers spoke to me. But their silence wasn't cold like before. They were all trying to communicate something, not with words, but with a respectful quiet. The moment the plane touched down, the intercom crackled to life for the usual landing announcement. But no one listened. All the passengers' attention was fixed on one spot: me. Then, as the door opened, a first-class flight attendant stood up. Instead of using the intercom, she spoke in her natural voice: "Thank you for flying with us today. I have just one final thing to say. The music you all heard on this flight wasn't played under anyone's orders or for anyone's profit. It was played by one woman, solely for her own heart. The passengers held their breath. The attendant's eyes were a little damp with tears. The coldness was gone, replaced by a gaze that looked straight at me. I am glad I got to hear that sound. It was like a signal. Scattered applause broke out from various spots in the cabin. It wasn't loud or showy, but it was warm and utterly sincere. Before long, the entire cabin was filled with applause. I stood up. I didn't step forward to bow. I simply offered a deep bow right where I stood, in front of my seat. That action was enough. Everyone was deeply moved by that simple bow. The applause went on and on. But I held the business card and the piece of fretboard to my chest and quietly walked toward the exit. Arthur was waiting for me by the door. The reporters will swarm you the second you step off. Are you ready? No, I shook my head, then managed a small smile. But I'll be fine. Arthur looked relieved and nodded. His final words were, "You were more honest with the music than anyone. That integrity alone is enough for the world to know you." I bowed deeply again and walked down the jetway, without a sound or a word. The passengers left behind opened their phones and mumbled to themselves, "Maybe that's what real music is." Within minutes, my name dominated global trends, Chloe, pianist of the plane miracle. But I still didn't know that, behind this wave of applause, my mother's name was about to flare up again. A mother's weakness. Back in the hotel room, I was finally alone. Outside the window, the early morning light slowly illuminated the concrete canyons of the city. It was so silent. So quiet, in fact, that I almost doubted whether everything on the plane had been real. But on the table were the business card, the piece of fretboard, and a phone that was constantly buzzing with notifications. Improv titled "The Cabin Melody" goes viral. Global music judge calls player the greatest discovery of the century. Who is she? Eleanor Vance's daughter? The name Eleanor Vance was trying to wrap around me again, like a ghost. The weight of that name made my breathing shallow. I slowly sat down on a chair and pulled an old photo from my luggage. It showed my young mother and me. We were supposed to be smiling, but her expression looked strained. "You are Eleanor Vance's daughter. You have talent, but your heart isn't necessary." I remembered her not flinching when I cried in front of the piano. If I missed a beat, my fingers were smacked. If I put too much emotion in, she dismissed it as too soft. Yet, I idolized her. Her playing was perfect, beautiful, and the icy coldness of it was mesmerizing. That's why I always felt like I could never measure up. I never even knew what my sound was supposed to be. I spread the bent music sheet on the bed, the one I'd picked up on the plane. Only now did I notice faint pencil marks scrawled in the corner. "If I broke your sound with my methods, I'm sorry." It was my mother's handwriting. My hand froze. It was one of the few signs of weakness the perfectionist had left behind. My mother, who never apologized in public or showed emotion to her daughter, had written these words in pencil, where no one would see them. The second I saw that, I felt something that had been frozen deep in my chest begin to melt. Quietly, but surely. I gently held the music to my chest and closed my eyes. No tears came, but I felt my heart softly relax. I am not my mother's sound. But she didn't completely deny my music either. That realization lifted years of weight from my shoulders. For the first time, I felt I could walk forward on my own, not relying on fame or my mother's legacy, but on my own sound. The phone rang. The screen showed Arthur Sterling's name. I answered, and his calm voice flowed through the speaker. "There will be a press conference tonight. Your name will be officially announced." "Okay. If you don't want it, we can still push for anonymity." I was silent for a while, but my decision was made. No. I'll do it. I'll put my name out there, and my past, all of it. Arthur chuckled softly. "Then get ready. The world is ready to welcome you." I hung up, took a deep breath, and stood. I picked up the piece of the fretboard and faced the mirror. In my eyes, there was no longer the look of a daughter running away. I was going to bring my music to the world, not as Eleanor Vance's daughter, but as Chloe. Maybe we need to spend a minute thinking about the real strength of silence. I was just sitting in my hotel room, watching the news footage quietly. I had the TV volume muted, only staring at my own image flashing across the screen. Just a few days ago, I thought my name, Chloe, was meaningless, that I had no right to claim it. Now, my name was on people's lips, traveling all over the world. It was a bizarre feeling. Then, a text popped up on my phone. It was from an old friend from music school. Saw it. You believed in your sound the whole time. I'm so proud of you. I actually cracked a smile. It was like a tiny flame had been lit in my chest. Outside, reporters with cameras were gathering, but I wasn't rushing. I was simply getting ready. The next stop was the stage of a world-famous music festival. I had decided to speak only with my music one more time. I carefully tucked the piece of the fretboard into my suitcase. It was a scar I carried, a symbol of what I had fought to protect. As night fell and the city lights dimmed, a sound slowly began to play in my heart. It was the chord of hope. That night, in Geneva, Switzerland, a name was displayed on the stage of a prestigious music festival, Chloe Vance. Now a global sensation, her appearance was a total surprise, a last-minute slot. Most of the audience had just watched her Cabin Melody performance on social media. The hall was filled with buzzing anticipation and a profound silence. The grand piano stood center stage. I walked out slowly, wearing the same simple cream-colored cardigan I had on during the flight. No expensive gown. No jewelry. Only myself and the music I needed to share. I didn't look at the audience at all. I just closed my eyes and placed my hands on the keys. The second the first note hit, the air in the hall trembled. The incomplete tune I played on the plane was being fully reconstructed right here, right now. The broken notes had become deep, clear resonance. The missing notes were connected by a gentle, steady flow. Every single note was a memory, the promise to my dad, the pain from my mom, Eleanor Vance, the days I doubted myself, the silent time I just kept walking. I poured all of it into the music. No words were needed. Only sound existed in that venue. When the music finally stopped, a long moment of silence followed. Even the quiet felt like an echo. I stood up slowly and bowed deeply to the audience. That's when Arthur Sterling, who had been watching from the front row, stood up. He was the first to clap. That was the signal. Like a wave crashing ashore, the entire audience jumped to their feet, and deafening applause filled the hall. My eyes widened in surprise, and then I let out a soft sigh. A single tear tracked down my cheek. It wasn't because of the praise. It was the pure, visceral realization that my own sound had connected me to the world. Backstage, reporters mobbed me, but I barely said a thing. I only whispered into the microphone, "This is a gift for my mother." The reporters gasped. Everyone knew the name Eleanor Vance, but they had all forgotten her daughter's voice. I didn't say anything more. Everything I needed to say was in the music. Outside the venue that night, people were crying over my performance. Viewers watching the live stream posted comments online, "I've never heard music like this. It's not just talent, it's a way of life." The music I played spoke for everyone who carried a wound. The piano notes had stopped, but the memory of that upsetting, honest sound kept ringing in people's minds. Walking in the light. The next morning, I walked slowly through the town, the day after the show. I could feel people looking, but my steps were quiet and light. A TV in a cafe I passed was showing footage from the night before. Geneva Music Festival surprise performance brings world to tears. Under the headline, there I was, bathed in applause. An elderly woman inside the cafe put her hand to her mouth and whispered, "That's the girl." I kept walking. I no longer had to hide. But I also wasn't seeking fame. I had chosen to live a life where my silence spoke volumes. Back at the hotel, my room was full of flowers and piles of letters, thanks and empathy from people who had been touched, many of whom saw their own pasts in my story. Among them was one modest envelope. No sender was listed, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single, monochrome photograph, my mother, Eleanor, with her hand on my shoulder in front of a piano. And on the back, just 2 words, couldn't play. Ah, maybe my mother tried to leave me a sign of her love, in her own difficult way, right up until the end. I held the photo in both hands and slowly tucked it away, deep inside my heart. That day, the airline held a formal press conference. Their CEO personally apologized for the anti-Asian comments and the destruction of the property by the white flight attendant. They announced the actions contradicted the company's values and that they were deeply remorseful. They also announced an offer of compensation and an exclusive contract with me. But I quietly turned down all of it. Because that wasn't the price of the music. The melody that rang out on that plane wasn't for sale. Arthur also called. World tour offers are flooding in. How should I respond? I paused for a moment, then replied, I don't want to answer yet. But when the music comes again, I know it will find someone who needs it. Arthur nodded deeply. As someone who had embodied music beyond just words, I was already a force to be reckoned with. That night, I turned off all the lights in my room and opened the window. A distant church bell chimed softly. The sound of birds, the hum of passing cars, the noise of people talking, all the sounds of life seeped into my heart like the blank spaces on a music sheet. I whispered one tiny thing, there are things that can be communicated without sound. No one heard the voice, but that was the true art of silence. A few days later, the autumn wind was blowing through Geneva. I sat on a bench in a quiet, small park, looking down at what was resting on my lap. It was a broken piece of the keyboard from the portable piano. Smashed and cracked on the plane, it was the last key that still held the memory of the music. I didn't call it junk. It was the first note of my journey to face the world and reclaim myself. My smartphone was filled with a mountain of messages from all over the world, musicians, critics, everyday people, and even unknown pianists from my mother's generation. Your performance changed my life. Your silence gave me courage. How can imperfect music be so moving? I didn't reply to any of them, but I read every single one. To me, they were silent letters, letters that were clearly connected to the melody that rang out on that airplane. A little girl walking by stopped next to my bench. She was holding a tiny toy piano and staring at the broken key on my lap. What's that? She asked. It's not a note anymore, but it's a piece of a very important sound, I answered gently, giving her a small smile. She nodded and lightly pressed a key on her toy piano. Plink. It was a single note, but it somehow blended with the sound of the wind. Do you like music? Yes, but I can't play yet. It's okay. The music won't run away. It'll wait for you. The girl laughed and ran off. Watching her go, I closed my hand around the fragment of the key. If that piano hadn't been broken, the cabin melody might never have been born. If that flight attendant hadn't lashed out, I might still be hiding in the box labeled Eleanor Vance's daughter. The pain, the silence, and the performance, all of it came together to make me who I am now. I slowly stood up, pulled a sketchbook from my bag, and wrote one sentence on a clean page, the sound born from silence never fades. Then I closed the book and bowed deeply. In a park with no audience and no stage, only the sound of leaves rustling in the wind and the faint toll of a church bell quietly accompanied my final bow. The story ends here. But the echo of that music will continue to live on in someone's heart.